They called it the Hale Mansion, but it felt more like a fortress. 12 nannies had entered through its polished oak doors, and 12 nannies had fled. Inside lived a 7-year-old girl, brilliant, wild, and grieving. Her mother, an automotive empire CEO, too broken to cry. And today, lucky number 13 was about to discover why even the most patient professionals couldn't last a month. Victoria Hale's Louboutin heels clicked against Italian marble as she descended the main staircase, her phone already pressed to her ear. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across walls lined with racing memorabilia, trophies, photographs, framed magazine covers. A shrine to speed, to victory, to a man who would never come home again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Shanghai deal closes at noon, she said crisply into the phone. I want those figures on my desk before. A crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by a delighted shriek. Victoria's jaw tightened. I'll call you back. In the kitchen, chaos reigned supreme. Maple syrup dripped from the chandelier. Pancake batter splattered across custom cabinetry that cost more than most people's cars. And there, perched triumphantly atop the kitchen island like a tiny general surveying her battlefield, sat Maddie Hale. Her dark hair, so much like her father's, hung in wild tangles around a face smeared with butter. Her school uniform was already ruined, the crisp white shirt now abstract art and breakfast foods. But it was her eyes that stopped Victoria cold. Green eyes that sparkled with mischief and something deeper, something that made Victoria's chest ache in ways she'd forgotten how to feel. Good morning, Mommy, Maddie said sweetly, swinging her legs. I made breakfast. Nanny number 13, Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman with 20 years of childcare experience and references from senators, stood frozen by the stove. Her pristine uniform was decorated with what appeared to be scrambled eggs, and her usually perfect gray bun had gone askew. She locked herself in the pantry, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice barely controlled. When I tried to coax her out, she built some kind of catapult. Victoria surveyed the damage, a wooden spoon balanced on an overturned mixing bowl, clearly engineered to launch breakfast items across the room. Ingenious, really. Maddie had inherited her father's mechanical mind along with his stubborn streak. Maddie, Victoria said, her CEO voice cutting through the chaos. Come down, now. I'm conducting an experiment, Maddie replied, reaching for another spoonful of batter. Did you know if you calculate the angle just right, you can make pancakes fly all the way to… Madison Rose Hale, the full name stopped her mid-sentence. Down. Maddie's face shuddered, the bright curiosity dimming to sullen compliance. She slid off the island, landing with a squelch in a puddle of syrup. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a gunshot. Mrs. Patterson straightened her uniform with shaking hands. Miss Hale, I must inform you that I cannot continue in this position. The child is… she's impossible. I've worked with difficult children before, but this… She gestured helplessly at the destruction. She set up this entire contraption while I was preparing her lunch for school. When I discovered her in the pantry, she told me she was testing the structural integrity of breakfast foods. Despite everything, Victoria felt a flicker of something. Pride. Her daughter was 7 years old and building siege weapons out of kitchen utensils. Marcus would have laughed until his sides ached, then helped her aim for the chandelier. But Marcus wasn't here. Marcus would never be here again. I understand, Victoria said to Mrs. Patterson, pulling out her phone. Carla will arrange your final payment. The nanny nodded stiffly and hurried out, her heels echoing down the hallway like rapid gunfire. The front door closed with a sound like a coffin lid dropping. Alone with her daughter in the wreckage of their kitchen, Victoria felt the familiar weight of failure settling on her shoulders. She ran companies worth billions, commanded boardrooms full of powerful men, negotiated deals that moved markets, but she couldn't handle one small girl with her father's eyes and her own stubborn heart. Go get ready for school, she said quietly. The driver will be here in 20 minutes. I don't want to go to school. You're going. I want to stay home with you. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. When was the last time Maddie had asked to spend time with her? When was the last time Victoria had said yes? I have meetings today, Maddie. Important ones. More important than me? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. Victoria looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw past the syrup in rebellion to the loneliness underneath. Maddie's shoulders were set in a defensive line, her chin raised in challenge, but her lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly. Of course not, Victoria said, but the words felt hollow. You know that's not. No, I don't know that. Maddie's voice was small now, all the fight draining out of her. Daddy would have helped me with the catapult. He would have made it better. The mention of Marcus sent a familiar spike of pain through Victoria's chest. She pressed her lips together, refusing to let the grief show. Maddie needed strength, not more sorrow. Your father isn't here, she said, hating how cold she sounded. Now go get ready. Maddie's face crumpled for just a moment before she masked it with anger. I hate you, she whispered, then turned and ran from the kitchen, her footsteps disappearing up the main staircase. Victoria stood alone among the wreckage, her reflection fractured in puddles of syrup on the marble floor. Her phone buzzed, probably Carla with updates on the Shanghai deal, but she didn't move to answer it. Miss Hale? Mr. Anders, the head of household staff, appeared in the doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but Victoria caught the disapproval in his eyes. Shall I contact the cleaning service? Yes. She turned away from the chaos, already composing her next move. And tell Carla I need a new nanny by tomorrow, someone with more experience. Perhaps, Mr. Anders hesitated, then forged ahead. Perhaps the issue isn't the qualifications of the staff, Miss Hale. The child seems to be acting out for attention. Victoria's phone buzzed again, insistent. The Shanghai deal, board meetings, a conference call with German investors. The real world, where she knew how to win. The issue, she said firmly, is finding the right professional for the job. Mr. Anders nodded, but his expression remained skeptical as he withdrew to begin damage control. 20 minutes later, Victoria watched from her office window as Maddie climbed into the back of the town car, her school bag dragging behind her like an anchor. Her daughter didn't look back at the house, didn't wave goodbye, just slumped against the leather seat and stared straight ahead as the car rolled down the circular drive. Victoria's phone rang. Carla, right on schedule. The Patterson situation? Her assistant asked without preamble. Resolved. I need you to contact the agency again, someone with military background this time, strict discipline protocols. A pause. Victoria, maybe we should consider. Military background, Carla, today. Another pause, longer this time. Of course. Oh, and the mechanic is scheduled to arrive this afternoon to evaluate the vintage collection. Jake Moreno from Moreno's Auto Works. Victoria had forgotten about the cars, Marcus's cars, gathering dust in the 8-bay garage that had once been his sanctuary. She'd avoided that space for 2 years, but the insurance company required a professional assessment for the renewed policy. Fine. Make sure he has all the access codes and specifications. I don't want to be disturbed. Understood. Victoria? Yes? Maddie's a good kid. She's just what, Carla? A sigh carried through the phone. She's just grieving, same as you. The line went quiet. Victoria stared out at the empty driveway, at the fountain that hadn't run since Marcus died, at the perfectly manicured grounds that felt more like a museum than a home. Get me that nanny, Carla. She hung up and turned back to her desk to contracts and mergers and things she could control. But Maddie's words echoed in the silence. More important than me? Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Hale estate, promising rain by evening. In a few hours, a man with calloused hands and a patient heart would arrive to tend to forgotten racing machines. He had no way of knowing that he was about to encounter something far more complex than any engine, a family broken down beyond repair, and a little girl who had been waiting her whole life for someone who would finally stay. Jake Moreno's pickup truck looked out of place against the pristine backdrop of the Hale estate. The faded blue Ford, more primer than paint in places, seemed to shrink beside the marble columns and manicured hedges. He sat for a moment in the circular driveway, engine ticking as it cooled, and whistled low through his teeth. "Well, Ethan," he said to the empty cab, "your old man's definitely not in Kansas anymore." He'd left his 15-year-old son back at the shop, manning the phones and probably sneaking peeks at car magazines instead of finishing his algebra homework. Ethan had wanted to come. The kid lived and breathed automotive history. But Jake had sensed this job required a more professional touch. The Hale collection was legendary in racing circles. Cars worth more than his shop, his house, and his entire business combined. Jake grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed and approached the front entrance, work boots crunching on pristine gravel. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a tall, thin man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Moreno," the man said with a slight bow. "I am Mr. Anders, head of household staff. Mrs. Hale is expecting you." The interior of the house hit Jake like a museum catalog, all marble and crystal, and that particular smell of wealth that seemed to exist somewhere between fresh flowers and furniture polish. Racing trophies glinted from built-in display cases, and photographs lined the walls. Victory celebrations, checkered flags, a dark-haired man with laughing eyes raising champagne bottles toward the camera. "The late Mr. Marcus Hale," Mr. Anders said, noticing Jake's attention. "Three-time Indianapolis 500 winner. His collection is considered one of the finest in the Midwest." Jake nodded respectfully. He'd followed Marcus Hale's career, had watched those Indy wins on television from his father's garage 20 years ago. The man had been a legend, fearless on the track, gracious in victory, gone too soon in a testing accident that made headlines across the racing world. They found Victoria Hale in what Mr. Anders called the morning room, though it was well past noon. She stood with her back to them, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the estate's grounds. Her posture was perfectly straight, her dark hair pulled into a flawless chignon that probably cost more than Jake made in a week. "Mrs. Hale," Mr. Anders announced. "Mr. Moreno has arrived." She turned, and Jake felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, not because he'd seen her before, though her face had graced business magazine covers often enough, but because of her eyes. They held the same distant look he'd seen in his own mirror for months after Sarah's death, the look of someone still breathing but not quite living. "Mr. Moreno." Her handshake was firm, professional, cold. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I trust you received the specifications from my insurance company?" "Yes, ma'am." "Comprehensive evaluation of 8 vintage racing vehicles, with particular attention to the 1967 Shelby GT 500 and the 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS. He'd memorized the list on the drive over, impressed despite himself. "That's quite a collection." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or pride. Hard to tell with someone who wore control like armor. "My husband's cars," she said simply. "I need them properly assessed for insurance purposes. The garage hasn't been, well, it hasn't been accessed in some time." "I understand. Mind if I ask how long since they were last serviced?" 2 years, the words came out clipped. Final. Marcus handled all the maintenance himself. Since then, they've been waiting. Jake nodded. He'd worked on plenty of neglected classics, cars that had been put away after their owners, deaths and left to gather dust while families grieved. It was always heartbreaking. Machines that had been loved, now abandoned like everything else that hurt too much to face. "Well, let's see what we're working with," he said gently. The garage was a cathedral to automotive excellence. 8 bays, each one climate-controlled and equipped with professional-grade lifts and tool arrays. The cars themselves sat under custom covers, silent and still as sleeping giants. Jake felt a familiar thrill at the sight. This was craftsmanship, history, passion, made manifest in steel and chrome. He was examining the Shelby, running his hands along its covered contours and making preliminary notes when he heard footsteps behind him. Small footsteps, trying to be quiet. "You can come out," he said without turning around. "I don't bite." A pause, then more footsteps, bolder now. "How did you know I was there?" Jake turned to find a small girl with dark hair and enormous green eyes watching him from behind a tool cabinet. She wore what looked like a school uniform, though it had clearly seen better days. There was something guarded about her posture, like a wild animal ready to bolt. 30 years working on cars teaches you to listen for trouble," he said with a slight smile. "You must be Maddie." "How do you know my name?" "Lucky guess, I'm Jake." He crouched down to her level, a trick he'd learned with Ethan years ago. "What do you think of all these cars?" Maddie stepped closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "They're Daddy's. Mom won't let anyone touch them. She paused, tilting her head. Are you going to fix them? Maybe. Depends on what's wrong with them. Want to help me find out? The question seemed to surprise her. Mom says I'm not supposed to bother the staff. Good thing I'm not staff then. I'm just a guy who fixes things. Jake pulled the cover off the Shelby, revealing pristine red paint and chrome that gleamed even in the garage's subdued lighting. What do you think? Pretty neat, huh? Maddie's eyes went wide. It's beautiful, she whispered, then looked up at Jake with sudden intensity. Daddy taught me about cars. Before. Yeah? What did he teach you? That the engine is the heart, and if the heart stops working, everything else is just decoration. Her voice got smaller. But hearts can break, can't they? Even car hearts? The question hit Jake harder than he'd expected. This kid was 7 years old and already carrying more weight than most adults could handle. Yeah, he said quietly, they can. But you know what's good about car hearts? What? They can be fixed. Takes patience and the right tools and someone who cares enough to try. But they can be fixed. Maddie stared at the Shelby for a long moment, her reflection wavering in the red paint. This was his favorite, she said finally. He called her Ruby, said she was faster than lightning and twice as pretty. Ruby's a good name for her. Jake ran his hand along the car's flank, feeling for imperfections. Your dad had good taste. He was the best driver in the whole world, Maddie said with fierce loyalty. He won lots of races. Mom has all the trophies in the house, but she doesn't look at them anymore. What about you? Do you like cars? I love them. The admission burst out of her like she'd been holding it back. But Mom says they're dangerous. She won't let me in the garage usually. Says it's not safe. Jake looked around at the immaculate space, at the professional safety equipment and careful organization. Safer than most playgrounds, really. But he understood. Sometimes danger wasn't about the physical space. Sometimes it was about the memories that lived there. Well, he said I could probably use an assistant. Someone to hand me tools. Tell me which way is which. Think you might be interested. Maddie's face lit up like sunrise. Really? You'd let me help? If it's okay with your mom. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Victoria's voice echoed from the garage entrance. Maddie, what are you doing in here? The little girl's face fell instantly, all the brightness snuffed out. I was just looking, Mom. I didn't touch anything. Victoria appeared beside them, her expression unreadable as she took in the scene. Jake crouched beside her daughter, the Shelby's cover pulled away, Maddie standing closer to a stranger than she had to anyone in months. I told you the garage was off limits, Victoria said, her voice carefully neutral. I know, but… No buts. Go inside and start your homework. Maddie's shoulders slumped in defeat. She started toward the door, then turned back. Will you still be here tomorrow? Jake glanced at Victoria, reading the warning in her eyes. We'll see, kiddo. After Maddie left, the garage felt larger, emptier. Victoria smoothed her skirt and adopted her business posture, but Jake caught the way her eyes lingered on the Shelby, the way her fingers twitched like she wanted to touch the paint her husband had loved. I apologize for the interruption, she said. Maddie has been difficult lately. She seems like a smart kid, just curious about her dad's cars. Yes, well, Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Curiosity needs boundaries. How long do you estimate for the evaluation? Jake recognized a subject change when he heard one. Couple of days, maybe 3. Depends on what I find under the hoods. Some of these classics can surprise you. Fine. Mr. Anders will provide whatever access you need. Please keep disruptions to a minimum. She turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Moreno, my daughter has been through a lot. She doesn't need false hope about things that can't be fixed. Jake watched her walk away, her heels clicking against concrete with military precision. But he'd caught something in her voice, a crack in that perfect control. Victoria Hale wasn't just protecting her daughter from disappointment. She was protecting herself. Alone with the sleeping cars, Jake pulled the cover completely off the Shelby and popped the hood. Ruby's engine was a work of art. Custom headers, chrome everything. The kind of meticulous attention that spoke of love as much as skill. Marcus Hale had built this machine with his own hands, had poured his passion into every bolt and gasket. Jake ran his fingers along the air intake, checking for corrosion, and thought about the little girl who'd called this beauty by name. Maddie Hale had her father's eyes for machinery and her mother's need for connection. She was bright, curious, hungry for attention from anyone who'd take the time to really see her. The kind of kid who could break your heart if you let her. Jake sighed and reached for his diagnostic tools. He'd come here to evaluate engines, not families. But as he began his inspection of Ruby's mechanical heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just encountered something far more complex than any car, and far more in need of careful, patient repair. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke, just as Jake was settling in for his second day with the Hale collection. Rain hammered against the garage's windows and sheets, turning the pristine grounds into an impressionist painting of water and gray light. Inside the climate-controlled space, Jake worked methodically through his checklist, but his mind kept wandering to the empty house beyond the rain. He'd been alone for barely an hour when he heard it, the soft scrape of the side door opening, followed by careful footsteps. Jake didn't look up from the Porsche's engine compartment, but he smiled to himself. "Morning, kiddo," he said. "Rough weather for a walk, don't you think?" Maddie appeared at his elbow, her school clothes replaced by jeans and an oversized sweater that probably belonged to her mother. Her dark hair was damp from the rain, and she clutched a thermos like a shield. "I brought you coffee," she said, holding out the thermos. "Mrs. Chen made it." "She's the cook. She said men who work with their hands need good coffee." Jake accepted the offering with proper gravity. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." The coffee was exceptional, rich and dark with just a hint of cinnamon. Mrs. Chen knows what she's doing. She's from somewhere called Guatemala. She makes the best pancakes in the world, but Mom never has time for breakfast anymore. Maddie perched on a nearby stool, swinging her legs. "What are you doing to the silver car?" "This is actually a Porsche 911 Carrera RS from 1973, and right now, I'm checking the oil pump. See this here?" Jake pointed to a component deep in the engine. "This little guy makes sure all the moving parts stay lubricated. Without it, the whole engine would seize up." "Like it would get stuck?" "Exactly. Cars are kinda like people that way. They need the right kind of care to keep running smooth." Maddie leaned closer, studying the intricate machinery with intense focus. "Daddy used to let me help sometimes, before." "What kind of help?" "I could hold flashlights and hand him tools. He said I had good hands for delicate work." She held up her small hands, examining them critically. "They're not very big, though." "Size doesn't matter much in engine work," Jake said. "It's about being gentle and paying attention. Want to help me with something?" Maddie's face transformed, caution melting into excitement. "Can I? Really?" Jake glanced toward the house, half expecting Victoria to materialize with another lecture about boundaries. But the rain created a curtain of privacy, and something about Maddie's eager expression reminded him so much of Ethan at that age. "See this oil filter?" Jake pointed to a cylindrical component. "It needs to come out so I can check it. Think you can handle the wrench?" He guided her small hands to the proper position, showing her how to grip the tool and apply steady pressure. "Not too fast. Let the wrench do the work." Maddie's tongue peeked out in concentration as she carefully loosened the filter. When it came free, she looked up at Jake with such pure joy that it hit him like a physical force. "I did it!" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You sure did. Natural mechanic, just like your dad." "Really? You think so?" "I know so. Look how careful you were, how you listened to the metal. That's not something you can teach. It's something you're born with." They worked together for the next hour, Maddie proving to be a surprisingly capable assistant. She had an intuitive understanding of how pieces fit together, and her small fingers could reach places Jake's larger hands couldn't access easily. More importantly, she was completely absorbed in the work, all the restless energy that seemed to drive her mischief channeled into productive focus. "Tell me about your son," she said as they moved on to checking the Porsche's brake fluid. "Ethan?" "He's 15. Thinks he knows everything about cars and girls." Jake chuckled. "Actually, he's not wrong about the cars. Kid can diagnose a problem from the sound of an engine 3 blocks away. Does he miss his mom?" The question was so matter-of-fact, so casually devastating that Jake nearly dropped his wrench. "Yeah," he said quietly. Yeah, he does. We both do. How did she die? Jake looked at Maddie, at her serious green eyes and the way she held herself so carefully, like she was made of glass. He could deflect, change the subject, protect them both from difficult truths. But something about this little girl made him want to be honest. Cancer, he said. She was sick for a long time, and then she wasn't here anymore. Were you scared? Terrified, every single day. Me too, Maddie whispered. When Daddy crashed, I was at school. Mom came to get me, and her face was all white, and I knew something terrible had happened. But I didn't think he wouldn't come home. Jake's chest tightened. He set down his tools and crouched beside her stool, meeting her eyes directly. I'm sorry about your dad, Maddie. He sounds like he was pretty special. He was the best daddy in the whole world. Tears sparkled in her eyes but didn't fall. He used to say that cars were magic, metal and oil and gasoline that could fly. He said if you listened close enough, you could hear their dreams. What do you think they dream about? Racing, going fast, feeling the wind. She touched the Porsche's fender with reverent fingers. But I think maybe they dream about the people who love them too. The wisdom in her words caught Jake off guard. This 7-year-old had insights about loss and love that most adults couldn't articulate. She was brilliant, empathetic, starving for connection. Everything a kid should be, wrapped around a core of grief that was far too heavy for such small shoulders to carry. Want to try starting her up? Jake asked impulsively. The Porsche? Really? Why not? Your dad would probably like knowing his little girl got to hear his car purr. Jake helped her into the driver's seat, her legs dangling comically above the pedals. The key turned easily, and the engine caught on the first try, a smooth, powerful rumble that filled the garage with controlled thunder. Maddie's grin was radiant. She sounds happy. Happy and ready to run, your dad took good care of his babies. They sat listening to the engine's song, rain drumming on the roof like applause. For a moment, the garage felt alive again. Not a mausoleum for dead dreams, but a place where passion and skill had created something beautiful. Then the door from the house banged open, and Victoria Hale stepped into the garage like an avenging angel. Madison Rose Hale, what do you think you're doing? The engine died as Jake quickly turned the key. Maddie shrank in the driver's seat, all the joy draining from her face. I was just helping, she said in a small voice. Helping? Victoria's gaze swept over the scene. Tools scattered across the workbench. Maddie behind the wheel of a car worth more than most houses. Jake standing beside her with oil on his hands. This is not helping. This is dangerous and completely inappropriate. Mrs. Hale, Jake began, I can explain. I don't need an explanation, Mr. Moreno. I need you to do the job I hired you for without involving my daughter. Victoria's voice was controlled ice, but Jake caught the fear underneath. Maddie, get out of that car. Now. Maddie climbed down slowly, her shoulders hunched in defeat. The Porsche runs really good, Mom. It sounds just like Daddy said it would. Victoria flinched as if slapped. Go to your room. But, room, now. After Maddie left, her footsteps echoing sadly across the concrete, Victoria turned her attention to Jake. Her composure was perfect, but he could see the tremor in her hands, the way she held herself too rigid. Mr. Moreno, I believe I was clear about boundaries. You were, and I overstepped, but Mrs. Hale, your daughter has a real gift for this stuff. She's careful, she listens, she understands. She's 7 years old. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. She's been through enough trauma without adding automotive accidents to the list. There was never any danger. There's always danger. The words exploded out of her, raw and desperate. Cars killed my husband, Mr. Moreno. They took the most important person in our lives and left us with nothing but empty trophies and silence. I will not have my daughter seduced by the same obsession that destroyed our family. The garage fell quiet except for the rain and the tick of cooling metal. Jake stared at Victoria, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not the Ice Queen CEO, not the perfect widow maintaining her dignity, but a terrified mother clinging to control because it was the only thing standing between her and complete collapse. I understand, Jake said gently, but hiding from cars won't bring him back. And keeping Maddie away from the things that connect her to her father, that's not protection, that's just another kind of loss. Victoria's jaw worked silently, emotions warring across her face. "You don't understand anything about our situation." "Maybe not. But I understand grief, Mrs. Hale, and I understand little girls who just want to feel close to the daddies they've lost." For a moment, Victoria looked younger, smaller, like she might cry or scream, or simply crumble under the weight of holding everything together. Then she straightened, armor sliding back into place. "Please confine yourself to the evaluation, Mr. Moreno. No more lessons." She turned and walked toward the house, her heels clicking with renewed precision. But at the door she paused without turning around. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Ma'am? How long before the pain stops feeling like drowning?" Jake looked at this woman who commanded boardrooms and built business empires, standing small and lost in a doorway while rain washed the world outside. "I'll let you know when I figure it out," he said honestly. Victoria nodded once and disappeared into the house, leaving Jake alone with the cars and the lingering scent of her perfume. He picked up his tools and got back to work, but his mind wasn't on engines anymore. It was on a little girl who'd lit up like sunshine when she'd helped remove an oil filter, and a mother so afraid of losing anything else that she was willing to sacrifice connection for the illusion of safety. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the garage, something had shifted. The first small crack had appeared in the fortress walls, and though none of them knew it yet, it would be enough to let the light begin seeping in. The morning after the garage incident, Victoria stood at her office window watching Jake work in the distance. Even from 3 stories up, she could see the methodical way he moved around her husband's cars, the careful attention he paid to each detail. Professional. Competent. Completely inappropriate for her daughter to be around. She'd hardly slept, replaying the scene over and over. Maddie's radiant smile behind the wheel of the Porsche, the way the little girl had looked at Jake, was something Victoria hadn't seen in 2 years. Trust, joy, the dangerous beginnings of attachment. Her phone buzzed. Carla. The military nanny fell through, her assistant said without preamble. Background check revealed some concerning financial issues, but I have 3 other candidates lined up for interviews this afternoon. Fine, schedule them. Victoria rubbed her temples where a headache was building. And Carla, make sure they understand the position requires strict adherence to household protocols. No exceptions. Of course, Victoria, about yesterday. What about yesterday? The cleaning staff mentioned quite a bit of laughter coming from the garage. Maddie seemed happy. Victoria's jaw tightened. Happiness isn't the goal here, Carla. Safety is, stability is, structure is. A pause. Of course. I'll send up the candidate files. After ending the call, Victoria returned to her work, but concentration proved impossible. Every time she looked up, she caught glimpses of Jake through the window, sometimes alone, sometimes with Maddie hovering nearby despite her explicit instructions. The distance made it impossible to tell if they were interacting. But Victoria's maternal radar was finely tuned after years of Maddie's creative rule-bending. By lunch, she'd had enough. She found them in the garage together, exactly as she'd feared. Jake was explaining something about brake calipers, while Maddie held a flashlight, both of them bent over the wheel well of Marcus's beloved Shelby. They were speaking in low, companionable voices, completely absorbed in their shared task. For a moment, Victoria hesitated in the doorway. The scene was so perfectly normal, so much like the countless afternoons she'd found Marcus and baby Maddie in this same space years ago. Her husband perched on a creeper, infant Maddie sleeping in her car seat nearby, both of them content in the mechanical symphony of restoration work. But Marcus was gone, and this man was not him. "Mr. Moreno," she said sharply, stepping into the garage. "A word." Jake straightened, immediately reading the danger in her tone. "Of course. Maddie, can you put that flashlight on the workbench for me?" "But we're not finished checking the—" "Maddie." Victoria's voice cut through her daughter's protest. "Inside. Now." The little girl's face fell, but she obeyed, shoulders slumped in defeat. As her footsteps faded toward the house, Victoria turned her full attention to Jake. "I thought I made myself clear yesterday." "You did, and I respect that. But Mrs. Hale, she was just holding a flashlight. She was bonding with you. Getting attached. That's exactly what I cannot allow." Victoria's control was beginning to fray, exhaustion and frustration bleeding through her professional facade. You don't understand what happens when the people Maddie cares about disappear from her life. Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag, his movements deliberate and calm. I'm not planning to disappear. Everyone says that. The nannies, the tutors, the therapists, they all promise to help, to stay, to make things better. And then Maddie does something that pushes their boundaries, or I do something that challenges their methods, and suddenly they're gone. Another loss for her to absorb. I'm not a nanny or a therapist. No, you're a mechanic I hired to do a job. That job does not include becoming my daughter's surrogate father figure. The words hung between them like a challenge. Jake studied Victoria's face, seeing past the anger to the fear beneath. Is that what you think is happening here? I think you're a well-meaning man who doesn't understand the complexities of our situation. Maddie has been through trauma, Mr. Moreno, real trauma. She doesn't need another person to invest in emotionally, only to have them leave when things get difficult. And you? Jake asked quietly. What do you need? The question caught Victoria off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her that? I need people to do the jobs I hire them for without overstepping their boundaries. That's not what I meant. Victoria's composure finally cracked. What I need is for my daughter to stop looking at strangers with the same hope she used to reserve for her father. What I need is for men to stop walking into our lives thinking they can fix things that are permanently broken. What I need is for you to assess those cars and leave before Maddie gets any more attached than she already is. Jake was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the distant hum of climate control systems and the tick of cooling metal. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she expected. Mrs. Hale, I lost my wife 3 years ago, cancer. Ethan was 12 when she died, and for a while there, I thought we might not make it. The grief was... He shook his head. It was bigger than both of us. But you know what I learned? What? Healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people who understand pain find each other and figure out how to carry it together. Jake's eyes met hers directly. Your daughter has a gift for this work. More than that, she has her father's passion living inside her. You can try to lock that away, protect her from it, but all you're really doing is cutting her off from a piece of who she is. Victoria felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, the urge to cry, to rail against the unfairness of loss, to admit that she had no idea how to be both mother and father to a child who needed more than she knew how to give. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and retreated behind familiar walls. Your job is to evaluate the mechanical condition of those vehicles, not psychoanalyze my family. I'd appreciate it if you'd focus on that. Jake nodded slowly. Understood. But, Mrs. Hale? Yes? Running from something doesn't make it go away. It just makes it harder to see clearly. He turned back to the Shelby, effectively dismissing her. Victoria stood for a moment longer, wanting to say something more, to explain, or defend, or simply scream at the unfairness of it all. But the words wouldn't come. She found Maddie in the kitchen, sitting at the massive marble island with her homework spread before her. The little girl didn't look up when Victoria entered, her pencil moving mechanically across math worksheets. How was school today? Victoria asked, attempting normalcy. Fine. Did you finish the science project on weather patterns? Yes. And your reading comprehension homework? Yes, Mom. I finished everything. Maddie's voice was flat, resigned. Can I go to my room now? Victoria studied her daughter's profile, noting the stubborn set of her jaw, so much like Marcus when he was trying not to show he was hurt. Maddie, about the garage. I know, I'm not supposed to bother Mr. Moreno. I won't do it anymore. It's not about bothering him. It's about safety and appropriateness, and it's about you being scared. Maddie finally looked up, her green eyes blazing with a perception that was devastating in someone so young. You're scared I'll like him better than the nannies. You're scared he'll leave like Daddy did. You're scared of everything. The accuracy of the observation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Maddie. Well, guess what, Mom? I'm scared too. I'm scared every single day that something bad will happen, and I'll be all alone, because you're too busy working to notice I exist. I'm scared that Daddy's cars will just sit there forever getting dusty, because you won't let anyone touch them. And I'm scared that the only person who's been nice to me in forever is gonna go away because you can't stand seeing me happy." Tears were streaming down Maddie's face now, all the pain and frustration and grief of the past 2 years pouring out in a torrent of 7-year-old honesty. "I miss Daddy so much it feels like my chest is broken," she sobbed. "And when Mr. Moreno lets me help with the cars, it feels like maybe Daddy's still there a little bit. But you hate that, don't you? You hate that I'm not sad all the time like you are." Victoria felt her own composure finally, completely shatter. She reached for her daughter, pulling the small, shaking body against her chest. "Oh, baby, I don't hate your happiness. I'm trying to protect it." "From what?" "From getting broken again." They held each other in the enormous kitchen, two people drowning in grief they'd never learned how to share. Outside, storm clouds gathered for the second day in a row, and in the garage, a mechanic continued his careful work, unaware that his presence had already changed everything, that the fortress walls were beginning to crack, and light was starting to seep through the fractures. The next morning brought sunshine and an uneasy truce. Victoria had left early for meetings in the city, her goodbye to Maddie softer than usual but still carefully controlled. Jake arrived to find a thermos of coffee waiting on his workbench with a note written in careful 7-year-old script. "Thank you for being nice to me. He was still smiling at the note when footsteps announced Maddie's arrival. She appeared in the garage doorway, hesitant now, testing the boundaries of their changed dynamic. "Mom said I could watch," she said carefully, "as long as I don't touch anything." "Watching's good," Jake agreed. "Sometimes the best way to learn is just by observing." But watching turned into helping, as it always did with Maddie. Her curiosity was stronger than any rule, and Jake found himself explaining brake systems and electrical components while she held flashlights and handed him tools. Her questions were intelligent, her focus complete, and her intuitive understanding of mechanical systems remarkable for her age. They were deep in the engine compartment of the 1969 Camaro when a new voice interrupted their work. "Dad, you in here?" Jake straightened to find his 15-year-old son standing in the garage entrance, backpack slung over his shoulder, and an expression of pure automotive awe on his face. "Ethan, what are you doing here? School doesn't get out for another hour." "Half day for teacher conferences. Mom would have." Ethan caught himself, the automatic reference to his deceased mother hitting like it always did. "I figured I'd catch a ride home with you, but holy shit, Dad, look at this place." "Language," Jake said automatically, but he was smiling. "Ethan, meet Maddie. Maddie, this is my son Ethan." Maddie peered around the Camaro's hood, suddenly shy. Ethan was tall and lanky, with his father's dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a vintage Camaro t-shirt that made her giggle, despite her nervousness. "Nice shirt," she said. Ethan looked down at his clothes, then at the car they were working on and grinned. "Nice car. 1969? 1969 Z/28, Maddie confirmed proudly. "It was my daddy's. He raced it at Watkins Glen in 1995 and came in second place." "Marcus Hale was your dad?" Ethan's eyes went wide. "Dude, I mean, wow, I have every one of his races saved on my computer. That Watkins Glen run was legendary." Something in Maddie's posture shifted. For the first time since Jake had met her, she looked like a normal kid talking to an older kid she wanted to impress. "You've seen Daddy race." "Are you kidding? Your dad was like the king of road racing. That move he pulled at Laguna Seca in '96, pure genius." Ethan moved closer to the Camaro, running his eyes over its lines with obvious appreciation. Is it okay if I look under the hood?" Jake watched the interaction with interest. Ethan had always been mature for his age. Losing his mother had forced him to grow up fast, but around Maddie, he seemed to access a younger version of himself. Maybe it was the shared love of racing, or maybe it was the recognition of another kid who understood loss. "You know about engines?" Maddie asked. "Some. Dad's been teaching me since I was your age. I can rebuild a small block Chevy in my sleep." Ethan's easy confidence seemed to fascinate Maddie. "What do you know?" "I'm learning. Mr. Moreno." "I mean, your dad. He's been showing me things. Like how the pistons move up and down, and how the spark plugs make tiny explosions to make the car go." "That's cool. Want to see something neat?" Ethan pointed to a component deep in the engine bay. "See that camshaft? Your dad probably had this thing custom ground for racing. The cam determines when the valves open and close, which affects how much air and fuel gets into the cylinders. Jake stepped back, letting the kids take over the conversation. There was something magical about watching automotive passion pass from one generation to the next, the way technical knowledge became a language that transcended age and loss. They worked together for the next hour, Ethan explaining concepts while Maddie absorbed everything with hungry attention. Jake found himself thinking about Marcus Hale, wondering if this was how he'd felt watching his daughter discover the joy of mechanical puzzles. It was Maddie who spotted the dog first. "There's something in the corner," she whispered, pointing toward the back of the garage where shadows gathered between tool cabinets. They approached cautiously and found a greyhound, lean, elegant, and clearly undernourished, curled up behind a stack of racing tires. The dog looked up at them with liquid brown eyes, tail giving a tentative wag. "Hey there, beautiful," Jake said softly, crouching down. "How'd you get in here?" The dog was clearly a female, with the distinctive build of a racing greyhound. Her coat was a silver gray that reminded Jake of polished aluminum, and despite her obvious hunger, she carried herself with dignity. "She's skinny," Maddie observed, her tender heart immediately engaged. "I bet she's hungry." "Probably abandoned," Ethan said, his voice tight with anger. "Happens all the time when racing dogs get too old or too slow. People just dump them." Jake examined the dog more closely, noting the track tattoos in her ears, proof of her racing past. She's definitely a retired racer. Probably not more than 4 or 5 years old. "Can we help her?" Maddie asked, already reaching out to stroke the dog's silky ears. "She needs food and water and a safe place to sleep." "Maddie," Jake said gently, "this isn't your house. We need to ask your mom." "Please?" Maddie's eyes were huge, desperate. "She's all alone, just like you," Jake finished silently, "like all of us." The dog seemed to sense Maddie's distress, stretching her long neck to nuzzle the little girl's hand. The gesture was so gentle, so perfectly timed that Jake felt his resistance crumble. "We can give her some food and water for now," he decided. "See if she'll let us help her." They spent the next hour setting up a temporary shelter in the corner of the garage. Ethan ran to the nearest pet store for supplies, while Jake and Maddie made the dog comfortable with blankets and fresh water. When Ethan returned with food, the dog ate with careful politeness, as if remembering long-ago lessons in manners. "What should we call her?" Maddie asked, watching the dog settle into her makeshift bed. "She's fast," Ethan observed, noting the way the dog moved with liquid grace despite her weakness. "How about Flash?" "Flash," Maddie repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Do you like it, Flash?" The dog's tail thumped against the blanket, and Maddie's face lit up with joy. It was perfect. The three of them working together, the rescued dog settling into safety, the afternoon sun slanting through garage windows and illuminating the mechanical treasures around them. For the first time since Marcus's death, the space felt alive again. Which was, of course, exactly when Victoria returned from her meetings. She stood in the garage doorway, taking in the scene with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. Her daughter, kneeling beside a strange dog, a teenage boy she'd never met, sprawled on the floor showing Maddie something in an engine manual, and Jake himself caught red-handed in the middle of what was clearly not just a professional evaluation. "Mom!" Maddie jumped up, guilty excitement written all over her face. "This is Ethan. He's Mr. Moreno's son, and we found Flash. That's the dog, and she was all alone and hungry, so we're taking care of her. Isn't she beautiful?" Victoria's gaze swept from the dog to Ethan to Jake, her expression unreadable. "I see." Jake stood slowly, preparing for another confrontation. But something in Victoria's posture was different this time, less rigid, more uncertain. She looked tired, and there was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mrs. Hale," he began, "I can explain." "Actually," she said quietly, surprising them all, "I'd like to hear it from Maddie." Maddie straightened, sensing the importance of the moment. "Flash is a retired racing dog, Mom. Someone threw her away because she got old, but she's still beautiful and smart and gentle. We gave her food and made her a bed, and she likes me. Can we keep her? Please." Victoria looked at the dog, who gazed back with patient dignity, then at her daughter's hopeful face. "A dog is a big responsibility, Maddie." "I know, but I'll take good care of her, I promise." and Mr. Moreno and Ethan can help me learn how." The admission hung in the air that Maddie wanted Jake and Ethan to stay, to be part of whatever came next. Victoria's jaw worked silently, emotions warring across her face. "We'll discuss it," she said finally, after Mr. Moreno finishes his evaluation. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Maddie beamed at the possibility, already imagining futures that included flash and garage days and the kind of family she'd almost forgotten was possible. As the sun set over the Hale estate, 4 humans and 1 dog settled into an easy evening routine. Ethan helping Maddie understand carburetor theory while Jake worked nearby, and Victoria watched from the doorway, afraid to join but unable to leave. Change was coming whether she was ready or not, and for the first time in 2 years, Victoria found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The confrontation, when it finally came, started small. Victoria found Maddie in the garage at 7:30 in the morning, still in her pajamas, sharing her breakfast toast with Flash, while Jake patiently explained the difference between horsepower and torque. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that for a moment Victoria forgot to be angry. Then reality crashed back in. "Madison Rosehale, what are you doing out here in your pajamas?" Maddie looked up from where she sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, Flash's elegant head resting in her lap. "I wanted to check on Flash before school. She was scared last night because of the thunder." "You are not supposed to be in the garage unsupervised." "I'm not unsupervised. Mr. Moreno's here." "Mr. Moreno is not your guardian, your teacher, or your nanny. He's here to do a job, not babysit you." Jake straightened from where he'd been working on the Ferrari's brake system, reading the danger in Victoria's tone. "Mrs. Hale, she's not bothering." "Don't!" Victoria's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "Just don't. Maddie, inside, now. You have exactly 15 minutes to get dressed for school." Maddie's face crumpled. "But what about Flash? She needs—" "The dog will be fine for 8 hours. You need to get ready for school and stop acting like this garage is your personal playground." "It's not a playground!" The words exploded out of Maddie with startling force. "It's Daddy's place. These are Daddy's cars and Daddy's tools, and you won't even come in here anymore because you're too scared to remember him." Victoria felt the familiar spike of panic that came whenever Maddie pushed against her carefully constructed boundaries. "I am not scared. I am being responsible." "There's a difference." "No, there isn't." Maddie scrambled to her feet, Flash moving away with liquid grace. "You're scared of everything. You're scared of the cars, and scared of the garage, and scared of me being happy for even 1 second. Maddie, that's enough. It's not enough. It's never enough. I haven't been enough since Daddy died." Tears were streaming down Maddie's face now, all the hurt and anger and loneliness pouring out in a torrent of 7-year-old honesty. "You don't want to see his cars run, and you don't want to hear his favorite songs, and you don't want me to love the things he loved because it reminds you that he's gone." "That is not true." "Yes, it is. Mr. Moreno actually listens when I talk about Daddy. He doesn't get that scary look on his face like you do. He doesn't change the subject or leave the room or find something important to do in your office." Each word hit Victoria like a physical blow. She was dimly aware of Jake standing frozen nearby, caught in the crossfire of emotions too big for any of them to contain. "Mr. Moreno doesn't understand our situation," Victoria said, grasping for control. "He understands about missing people. His wife died too, and he's sad, but he's not mean about it like you are." "I am not mean." "You fired Mrs. Patterson for letting me make pancakes. You told Mrs. Chen not to cook Daddy's favorite breakfast anymore. You locked away all his pictures, except the stupid racing ones that make you look important." Maddie's voice broke completely. "And now you want to take away Mr. Moreno and Ethan and Flash because they make me feel like maybe families don't have to be broken forever." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw past the pajamas and tear-streaked face to the desperate longing underneath. Maddie wasn't just grieving her father, she was grieving the mother Victoria used to be, the woman who had laughed and played and made pancakes shaped like race cars on Saturday mornings. "Maddie," she began, but her voice came out wrong, too small, too broken. "I want Daddy," Maddie sobbed. "I want him so much it hurts in my chest and I can't breathe, and you won't even let me talk about him without looking like you want to throw up." Victoria felt her own composure finally, completely shatter. 2 years of carefully maintained control cracked open, and suddenly she was on her knees on the garage floor, pulling her sobbing daughter against her chest. "I know," she whispered. "I know, baby, I miss him too, every single day." "Then why won't you let me miss him with you?" The question broke something fundamental inside Victoria's chest. She held Maddie tighter, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat against her own. "Because if I start," Victoria said finally, "I'm afraid I'll never stop crying." It was Jake who broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Hale, could I share something with you?" Victoria looked up at him through tears she hadn't shed in 2 years. "What?" "When Sarah died, I thought the worst thing that could happen was falling apart in front of Ethan. I thought I had to be strong, had to keep it together, had to protect him from seeing how broken I was." Jake crouched down so he was at their level. "But you know what I learned?" "What?" Maddie whispered against her mother's shoulder. "I learned that kids need to see their parents grieve, because if they don't, they think maybe the person who died wasn't worth grieving for. Or worse, they think maybe they're not worth grieving for either." Victoria's tears came harder now, years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. "I don't know how to do this without him." "Neither does she," Jake said gently, nodding toward Maddie. "But maybe you could figure it out together." They sat there on the concrete floor, Victoria and Maddie clinging to each other while Jake respectfully gave them space. And for the first time since Marcus's death, grief felt like something they could share instead of something that divided them. Flash approached cautiously, her aristocratic head tilting as she studied the crying humans. Then, with the wisdom that dogs seem to possess about when comfort is needed, she settled down beside them and rested her chin on Victoria's knee. The gesture was so gentle, so perfectly timed that Victoria found herself laughing through her tears. "She's very polite for a stray." "Greyhounds are like that," Jake said, dignified. "They know how to wait." "How long?" Victoria asked, stroking Flash's silky ears. "How long what?" "How long do we wait before it stops hurting so much?" Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I don't think it ever stops hurting, Mrs. Hale. But it changes. Gets softer around the edges. And sometimes—" He looked at Maddie, still wrapped in her mother's arms. "Sometimes sharing the hurt makes it easier to carry." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained for so long. She looked around the garage, at Marcus's cars waiting patiently for attention, at the tools arranged exactly as he'd left them, at the racing photographs that chronicled a life lived at full speed. "He would have loved this," she said quietly. Maddie learning about engines, a rescued greyhound making herself at home, the cars being useful again instead of just monuments. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "I think he would have." Maddie pulled back to look at her mother's face, hope and fear warring in her green eyes. "Does this mean Flash can stay?" Victoria looked at the dog, who gazed back with patient dignity, then at Jake, who was trying to give them privacy while clearly caring about the outcome, and finally, at her daughter's tear-streaked face. "It means we have a lot to figure out," she said carefully, "about Flash, about the garage, about a lot of things." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And for the first time in 2 years, Victoria found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, there were worse things than letting people into their carefully guarded lives. Even if those people came with calloused hands, patient hearts, and the dangerous possibility that healing might actually be possible after all. 3 days after the collision in the garage, Victoria found herself doing something she hadn't done in 2 years, standing voluntarily among Marcus's cars. The space felt different now, less like a mausoleum and more like a workshop. Jake's tools were neatly arranged on the workbenches, diagnostic equipment hummed quietly in the background, and Flash had claimed a corner near the vintage Mustang as her personal domain. Victoria watched from the doorway as Jake guided Maddie through the final steps of reconnecting the Shelby's battery. Her daughter's face was intense with concentration, her small hands surprisingly steady as she tightened the terminal connections. "Good," Jake said quietly. "Now turn the key, and let's see if Ruby remembers how to sing." Maddie slipped into the driver's seat, her legs dangling above the pedals exactly as they had that first day Victoria had caught them together. But this time, instead of panic, Victoria felt something warmer, more complex. Pride, maybe, or possibility. The engine turned over on the first try, settling into the deep, throaty rumble that had once been the soundtrack to their lives. Victoria's breath caught as memories flooded back. Marcus fine-tuning this very engine on weekend mornings, the smell of high-octane fuel mixing with coffee, the way he'd light up when everything came together perfectly. "She sounds good," Victoria said, surprising everyone, including herself, by stepping fully into the garage. Maddie's head whipped around, eyes wide with cautious hope. "Mom, you want to listen?" Victoria hesitated, old fears warring with new possibilities. "Yes, I'd like to listen." Jake caught her eye over Maddie's head, his expression carefully neutral but approving. He understood the significance of this moment, the courage it took for Victoria to voluntarily enter this space of memory and loss. "Tell your mom what you learned about the engine," Jake suggested gently. Maddie's face lit up as she launched into an explanation of carburetor settings and timing adjustments, her technical vocabulary impressive for a 7-year-old. Victoria found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions that made Maddie beam with pride at being able to answer them. "Daddy would be proud," Maddie said finally, her voice softer now. "Right, Mom?" Victoria looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw Marcus in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about mechanical precision, the gentle confidence in her small hands. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "He would be very proud." They spent the next hour together, the three of them plus Flash, moving between the different cars as Jake explained his assessment findings. The Ferrari needed new brake pads, the Porsche had a minor electrical issue, the Mustang was practically perfect. Victoria found herself remembering stories about each vehicle, where Marcus had found them, what races they'd won, the late nights he'd spent perfecting their performance. "This one," she said, stopping beside a sleek silver Aston Martin, "this was our first real fight after we got married." "Really?" Maddie perked up with interest. "You and Daddy fought?" "Oh, did we fight? He spent our entire honeymoon fund on this car without telling me. I didn't speak to him for a week." Victoria's smile was soft with memory. "Then he took me for a drive up the coast and, well, I forgave him pretty quickly after that." Jake watched the interplay between mother and daughter, seeing how sharing memories seemed to ease something in both of them. Victoria was still guarded, still careful, but the rigid control was softening into something more human. "Would you like to hear her run?" he asked impulsively. Victoria hesitated. "I don't know." "Please, Mom." Maddie's voice was hopeful but not demanding, "just to make sure she's okay." The question was about more than mechanical soundness, and they all knew it. It was about whether the things Marcus had loved could exist in their world without causing pain. Whether memory could be celebration instead of torture. Victoria looked at the Aston Martin, at Jake's patient face, at her daughter's carefully controlled hope. Then she reached for the keys hanging on the pegboard exactly where Marcus had left them. "Just for a minute," she said quietly. The engine started with a purr that was pure silk and controlled power. Victoria's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel, but she didn't let go. The sound filled the garage like music, rich and complex and alive. "Perfect," Jake said approvingly. "Your husband knew what he was doing with this one." "He did," Victoria agreed, her voice barely audible over the engine. "He really did." When she finally turned off the ignition, the silence felt different, not empty, but peaceful, like something had been settled, some long-held tension finally released. "Mom," Maddie said carefully, could we do this again sometime, all of us together?" Victoria looked around the garage, at the cars that suddenly seemed less like monuments and more like old friends waiting to be remembered properly. At Jake, who had somehow known exactly how much to push and when to step back. At Flash, who watched everything with the patient wisdom of a creature who understood about waiting for the right moment. "I think," Victoria said slowly, "that might be exactly what we need." It was Carla who brought the news the next morning, her usually composed expression troubled as she entered Victoria's office, with a manila envelope and a cup of coffee that had gone cold somewhere between the executive assistant's desk and the CEO's door. "What is it?" Victoria asked, noting the worry lines around her assistant's eyes. "An invitation," Carla said carefully. The Midwest Racing Heritage Foundation is hosting their annual gala next month. They want to honor Marcus posthumously, induct him into their Hall of Fame. Victoria's stomach clenched. She'd been avoiding the racing community since Marcus's death, turning down every invitation, every memorial, every attempt to celebrate his legacy. The grief was still too raw, the connection between cars and loss still too immediate. "Send regrets," she said automatically. "You know I don't." Victoria. Carla's voice was gentle but firm. They're not just honoring Marcus. They want Maddie to accept the award on his behalf. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Maddie, in front of hundreds of racing enthusiasts, accepting recognition for the father she'd lost. The idea was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. She's 7 years old, Carla. She's also Marcus Hale's daughter. And from what I've seen lately, she's developing quite an interest in automotive engineering herself. Victoria thought about the previous evening, about Maddie's confident explanations of engine mechanics and the pride in her voice when she talked about her father's cars. About the way her face had lit up when the Aston Martin purred to life. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "There's more," Carla hesitated. "They've invited you to speak. About Marcus's impact on the sport, his dedication to safety improvements, his mentorship of younger drivers." Victoria's hands clenched involuntarily. Speaking publicly about Marcus meant facing the racing community she'd abandoned. Meant standing in front of people who had known him as a driver while she tried to explain what he'd meant as a husband and father. "I can't." "You can," Carla said quietly, "and maybe you should, for Maddie." After Carla left, Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the invitation without really seeing it. Through her window, she could see the garage in the distance, could make out Maddie's small figure moving around the cars with Jake and Ethan. Even from this distance, she could tell her daughter was happy, engaged, connecting with a part of her heritage that Victoria had tried to wall off. Maybe it was time to stop running from Marcus's legacy. Maybe it was time to help Maddie claim it as her own. That evening, Victoria found herself in the garage again, drawn by the sound of laughter and the soft murmur of technical conversation. Jake was showing Maddie and Ethan how to check tire pressure. All three of them gathered around the Ferrari with Flash supervising from her corner. "Jake," Victoria said, interrupting their work, "could I speak with you for a moment?" He straightened, reading something serious in her tone. "Of course." "Kids, why don't you start the oil pressure checks on the Mustang?" They moved to a quieter corner of the garage, near the tool cabinets where Marcus's personal effects still waited in neat, untouched rows. "There's an event," Victoria began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "What kind of event?" "A racing gala. They want to honor Marcus, and they've asked Maddie to accept the award." Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, but Jake could hear the uncertainty underneath. "I don't know if she's ready for something like that." Jake studied her face, reading the fear and hope warring in her expression. "What do you think Marcus would have wanted?" "For Maddie to be proud of who he was, to understand what he meant to people, what he accomplished." Victoria's voice softened. "But Jake, standing up in front of all those people, talking about racing and legacy, and I don't know if I can do it." "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said quietly. Victoria looked at him, startled by the offer implicit in his words. "Jake, Maddie's amazing, Victoria. She's smart and brave, and she loves those cars almost as much as her father did. If you think this event would be good for her, if you think it would help her connect with his memory, then maybe it's worth the risk." Victoria glanced across the garage at her daughter, who was explaining something animated to Ethan while he listened with patient attention. Maddie looked confident, engaged, proud of her growing knowledge. "She would love it," Victoria admitted. "The cars, the stories, the chance to hear other people talk about how much they respected her father." "Then maybe that's your answer." Victoria nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not the old familiar panic, but something newer, more complex. The scary, exhilarating possibility that moving forward didn't mean leaving Marcus behind. "Jake," she said as he started to walk away. "Yeah? Would you consider coming with us to the gala?" The question surprised them both. Jake turned back, his expression careful. "Are you sure?" Victoria looked around the garage, at the cars that were running again, at the space that felt alive for the first time in 2 years. at the man who had somehow known exactly how to help them heal without trying to replace what they'd lost. "I'm sure," she said quietly, "we're going to need all the support we can get." And for the first time since Marcus's death, Victoria found herself looking forward instead of back, imagining a future where grief and celebration could coexist, where her daughter could claim her father's legacy without being crushed by the weight of loss. It was a beginning, small, tentative, but undeniably real. The Midwest Racing Heritage Foundation Gala was exactly the kind of event Victoria had spent 2 years avoiding. 500 people in formal wear, the air thick with expensive cologne, and the sound of high-powered engines idling in the parking lot. Classic race cars lined the entrance to the convention center like automotive jewelry, their chrome gleaming under strategically placed spotlights. Victoria stood at the entrance holding Maddie's hand, fighting the familiar urge to turn around and drive straight home. Her daughter looked beautiful in her navy blue dress, a miniature version of Victoria's own elegant black gown. But there was tension in the small shoulders that matched Victoria's own anxiety. "There are a lot of people," Maddie observed, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, there are." Victoria squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Are you nervous?" "A little. Are you?" "A lot," Victoria admitted, then caught herself. When had she started being honest about her fears with Maddie? When had that become possible? "Mrs. Hale?" Victoria turned to find Jake approaching from the parking area, and her breath caught slightly. She'd seen him in work clothes for weeks now, had grown accustomed to the easy confidence he wore in the garage. But Jake in a well-fitted dark suit was a revelation, still unmistakably himself, but polished in a way that reminded her he was more than just the mechanic who'd wandered into their lives. "You clean up nice, Moreno," she said, attempting lightness. "Not too shabby yourself, Hale." His smile was warm, reassuring. "How are we doing, kiddo?" he asked Maddie. "Scared," Maddie said honestly, "but excited too. Is that weird?" "Nah, that's just life getting interesting." Jake crouched down to her level, straightening her already perfect collar with gentle hands. "You remember what we talked about? That Daddy would be proud of me no matter what, and that all these people loved racing because of drivers like him." "Exactly. And if you get overwhelmed, you just look for me or your mom, okay? We're not going anywhere." Ethan appeared beside them, tugging at his tie with obvious discomfort. "Dad, remind me why I couldn't just stay home and watch this on livestream." "Because," Jake said patiently, "sometimes showing up is more important than being comfortable." They made their way inside together, Victoria noting how Jake naturally positioned himself between their family and the crowd, creating a buffer zone that felt protective without being possessive. People recognized her immediately. The automotive industry was small enough that Marcus Hale's widow was still a known quantity. But Jake's presence seemed to deflect some of the attention, giving her space to breathe. The cocktail hour was a minefield of well-meaning condolences and racing stories. Victoria found herself reliving Marcus's career through other people's memories, hearing anecdotes she'd never known about his kindness to rookie drivers, his mentorship of young mechanics, his reputation for fair play even in the heat of competition. "He saved my career," an older man was telling her, his voice thick with emotion. "I was about to give up after a string of bad seasons, and Marcus took the time to teach me about setup adjustments. Changed everything for me." Maddie listened to every story with rapt attention, absorbing these glimpses of her father from the perspective of people who'd known him as a professional, not just as daddy. Victoria watched her daughter's face, seeing pride and curiosity replacing the initial nervousness. "Mrs. Hale?" A woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached them during a lull in conversation. "I'm Margaret Chen, president of the foundation. Thank you so much for coming tonight." "Thank you for honoring Marcus," Victoria replied automatically. "Oh, we're not just honoring him, we're celebrating him. There's a difference." Margaret's attention shifted to Maddie. "And you must be Madison. I've heard wonderful things about your interest in automotive engineering." Maddie straightened, suddenly serious. "I've been learning about engines and brake systems and transmission ratios. Jake, Mr. Moreno, has been teaching me." "Jake Moreno?" Margaret's eyebrows rose with interest. "The restoration specialist from Burlington. My goodness, you couldn't ask for a better teacher. His work on vintage racing engines is legendary." Victoria glanced at Jake, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. She was beginning to realize there was more to his background than he'd revealed. Apparently, his reputation in restoration circles was more significant than his modest manner suggested. The dinner portion of the evening passed in a blur of speeches and video tributes. Victoria found herself holding her breath during the memorial montage, watching Marcus's career unfold in race footage and photographs. Beside her, Maddie watched with wide eyes as her father's younger self flashed across the screen, victorious, passionate, fully alive. When they called Maddie to the stage to accept Marcus's Hall of Fame induction, Victoria's heart nearly stopped. Her 7-year-old daughter looked impossibly small walking across the enormous stage, but her posture was straight, her head held high. The presenter, a famous former driver, crouched down to Maddie's level as he handed her the Crystal Award. "Your daddy was one of the best drivers I ever raced against," he said into the microphone. "But more than that, he was one of the best men I ever knew. What do you think he'd want everyone to know about racing?" Maddie considered the question seriously, then leaned toward the microphone. "He always said that racing taught him that going fast isn't about being brave. It's about being smart and careful and knowing your car so well that you trust it completely." She paused, gathering courage. "And he said that the best part about winning wasn't the trophy. It was sharing it with the people you love." The applause was thunderous, but Victoria barely heard it. She was too busy wiping tears from her cheeks, too overwhelmed by pride in her daughter's poise and wisdom. When Maddie returned to their table, award clutched carefully in both hands, Victoria pulled her into a fierce hug. "You were perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." But it was during the break before Victoria's speech that everything went wrong. She was in the ladies' room, trying to calm her nerves and touch up her makeup, when she overheard two women talking in the stalls behind her. "Such a tragedy about Marcus," one was saying, "and that poor little girl, growing up without a father." "Well, at least Victoria seems to be moving on," the other replied. "Did you see her with that mechanic? Very cozy for someone who's supposed to be in mourning." Victoria's blood went cold. "I heard she's been letting him work on Marcus's car collection. Some people might think that's a bit soon, don't you think?" "Money talks, I suppose, though I have to wonder what Marcus would think about his cars being handled by some small-town garage owner." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She stood frozen at the sink, watching her reflection pale in the mirror as the women's conversation continued, each casual judgment cutting deeper than the last. By the time she made it back to their table, Victoria was shaking. Jake took one look at her face and leaned closer, his voice concerned. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said quickly, but her voice was too tight, too controlled. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was drowning in the familiar panic that came with public scrutiny, with the weight of other people's expectations about how a widow should behave, how long grief should last, what moving forward was supposed to look like. When they called her to the podium, Victoria's legs felt unsteady. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras recording every word for posterity, and felt the walls closing in. She began her prepared remarks about Marcus's contributions to racing safety, his mentorship of younger drivers, his dedication to the sport, but halfway through, her voice began to shake. The words felt hollow, inadequate, like she was reducing a complex, passionate man to a collection of professional achievements. "Marcus wasn't just a great driver," she said, departing from her script. He was. The silence stretched out, filled with the weight of things she couldn't say. How do you explain a love that had reshaped your entire world? How do you describe the person who had taught you that home wasn't a place but a feeling, that family could be chosen as well as born? In the audience, Jake caught her eye. His expression was steady, encouraging, completely without judgment. Beside him, Maddie watched with the kind of faith that only children could have in their parents, ability to handle impossible things. He was the kind of man who believed that cars had personalities. Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger. Who could spend hours explaining to a 5-year-old why different engines made different sounds? Who taught our daughter that speed without control was just recklessness, but speed with precision, that was poetry? She found her rhythm then, speaking not to the crowd but to Jake and Maddie, sharing memories that were real and personal and true. She talked about Marcus's terrible cooking and his perfect timing, his competitive streak, and his generous heart. She made him human again. Not just a legend, but a man who had loved completely and been completely loved in return. When she finished, the applause was different, warmer, more personal. But Victoria barely heard it. She was too busy looking at her daughter's proud face, too focused on Jake's encouraging smile, too overwhelmed by the realization that she had just spoken publicly about Marcus without falling apart. Later, in the parking lot, as they said goodbye to the evening's formal requirements, Maddie tugged on Victoria's dress. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "That was really good. What you said about Daddy, he would have liked it." Victoria knelt down to hug her daughter, feeling something fundamental settle into place. "You think so?" "I know so. And Mom?" "Hmm? I'm glad Jake and Ethan came with us. It felt like we were a team." Victoria looked up at Jake, who was helping Ethan out of his tie with patient hands, and felt the truth of her daughter's words resonate in her chest. They had been a team tonight. Not just her and Maddie against the world, but something larger, more stable. Something that felt remarkably like family. The idea came to Maddie during breakfast, 3 days after the gala, delivered with the kind of 7-year-old logic that was impossible to argue with. "We should have a garage day," she announced, looking up from her cereal with the expression of someone who had just solved world hunger. "Like a family day, but with cars." Victoria paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "A garage day. You know, all of us together in the garage. You and me and Jake and Ethan and Flash. We could work on the cars and tell stories and maybe have a picnic inside if it rains." Maddie's enthusiasm was building with each word. "It would be like the old days with Daddy, but different, new." The suggestion hung in the morning air like a challenge. Victoria had been spending more time in the garage since their conversation after the gala, tentatively reclaiming the space that had once been so central to their family life. But a whole day? With Jake and Ethan? Making it official somehow? "I don't know, sweetheart. Jake has his own work to do, and Ethan has school." "It's Saturday tomorrow," Maddie pointed out with relentless 7-year-old fact-checking. "And Jake said the evaluation is almost done. Maybe this could be like a celebration?" Victoria looked at her daughter's hopeful face and felt the familiar tug-of-war between protection and possibility. The gala had been a success, but it had also reminded her how easily she could lose control, how quickly the outside world could intrude on their carefully constructed peace. But Maddie was right about one thing. The evaluation was nearly complete. Soon Jake would pack up his tools and return to his life in town, taking Ethan with him, taking the easy warmth and steady presence that had somehow become essential to their daily routine. "Let me think about it," Victoria said finally. But Maddie was already moving, the way she did when she sensed adult resistance beginning to crumble. "I'll ask Mrs. Chen if she can make those sandwiches you like. And maybe we could play music in the garage. Daddy always said cars ran better with good music." By the time Victoria arrived at the office an hour later, her assistant was already smiling knowingly. "Let me guess," Carla said without looking up from her computer. "A certain 7-year-old called to see if she could borrow my portable speakers for a family garage day." "She called you?" "Used your office line. Told me it was very important business." Carla's smile widened. "I told her I'd be happy to lend them, assuming her mother approved the event." Victoria sank into her desk chair, feeling outmaneuvered by someone who still needed help tying her shoes. "I haven't said yes yet." "But you're going to." "I might." "Victoria," Carla's voice gentled, "when was the last time you saw Maddie this excited about something that wasn't designed to drive you crazy?" The question hit home. Since Jake's arrival, Maddie's mischief had transformed into focus, her rebellion into enthusiasm. She woke up eager for the day, came home from school with stories about engines and horsepower instead of complaints about classmates and homework. "What if I mess it up?" Victoria asked quietly. "What if I can't? What if I'm not good at this family thing anymore?" "You're already good at it. You're just scared to trust yourself." Carla moved to perch on the edge of Victoria's desk, her expression serious now. "That little girl adores you, Victoria. And more importantly, she believes in you. Maybe it's time to believe in yourself." That evening, Victoria found Jake in the garage putting finishing touches on his assessment of the Porsche. He looked up when she entered, noting something different in her posture. "How'd the office day go?" he asked, straightening from the engine compartment. "Productive," Maddie called my assistant to request equipment for tomorrow's garage day. Jake's eyebrows rose. Garage day? Apparently it's a thing now, a family event involving cars, food, and music. Victoria tried to keep her tone light, but Jake caught the uncertainty underneath. She wants all of us to participate. All of us meaning? Language, Jake said automatically, but he was smiling. Ethan, meet Maddie. Maddie, this is my son Ethan. Maddie peered around the Camaro's hood, suddenly shy. Ethan was tall and lanky, with his father's dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a vintage Camaro t-shirt that made her giggle, despite her nervousness. Nice shirt, she said. Ethan looked down at his clothes, then at the car they were working on and grinned. Nice car. 1969? 1969 Z/28, Maddie confirmed proudly. It was my daddy's. He raced it at Watkins Glen in 1995 and came in second place. Marcus Hale was your dad? Ethan's eyes went wide. Dude, I mean, wow, I have every one of his races saved on my computer. That Watkins Glen run was legendary. Something in Maddie's posture shifted. For the first time since Jake had met her, she looked like a normal kid, talking to an older kid she wanted to impress. You've seen Daddy race. Are you kidding? Your dad was like the king of road racing. That move he pulled at Laguna Seca in '96? Pure genius. Ethan moved closer to the Camaro, running his eyes over its lines with obvious appreciation. Is it okay if I look under the hood? Jake watched the interaction with interest. Ethan had always been mature for his age. Losing his mother had forced him to grow up fast, but around Maddie, he seemed to access a younger version of himself. Maybe it was the shared love of racing, or maybe it was the recognition of another kid who understood loss. You know about engines? Maddie asked. Some. Dad's been teaching me since I was your age. I can rebuild a small block Chevy in my sleep. Ethan's easy confidence seemed to fascinate Maddie. What do you know? I'm learning, Mr. Moreno. I mean, your dad. He's been showing me things. Like how the pistons move up and down, and how the spark plugs make tiny explosions to make the car go. That's cool. Want to see something neat? Ethan pointed to a component deep in the engine bay. See that camshaft? Your dad probably had this thing custom ground for racing. The cam determines when the valves open and close, which affects how much air and fuel gets into the cylinders. Jake stepped back, letting the kids take over the conversation. There was something magical about watching automotive passion pass from one generation to the next, the way technical knowledge became a language that transcended age and loss. They worked together for the next hour, Ethan explaining concepts while Maddie absorbed everything with hungry attention. Jake found himself thinking about Marcus Hale, wondering if this was how he'd felt watching his daughter discover the joy of mechanical puzzles. It was Maddie who spotted the dog first. There's something in the corner, she whispered, pointing toward the back of the garage where shadows gathered between tool cabinets. They approached cautiously and found a greyhound, lean, elegant, and clearly undernourished, curled up behind a stack of racing tires. The dog looked up at them with liquid brown eyes, tail giving a tentative wag. Hey there, beautiful, Jake said softly, crouching down. How'd you get in here? The dog was clearly a female, with the distinctive build of a racing greyhound. Her coat was a silver gray that reminded Jake of polished aluminum, and despite her obvious hunger, she carried herself with dignity. She's skinny, Maddie observed, her tender heart immediately engaged. I bet she's hungry. Probably abandoned, Ethan said, his voice tight with anger. Happens all the time when racing dogs get too old or too slow. People just dump them. Jake examined the dog more closely, noting the track tattoos in her ears, proof of her racing past. She's definitely a retired racer. Probably not more than 4 or 5 years old. Can we help her? Maddie asked, already reaching out to stroke the dog's silky ears. She needs food and water and a safe place to sleep. Maddie, Jake said gently, this isn't your house. We need to ask your mom. Please? Maddie's eyes were huge, desperate. She's all alone, just like you, Jake finished silently, like all of us. The dog seemed to sense Maddie's distress, stretching her long neck to nuzzle the little girl's hand. The gesture was so gentle, so perfectly timed that Jake felt his resistance crumble. We can give her some food and water for now, he decided. See if she'll let us help her." They spent the next hour setting up a temporary shelter in the corner of the garage. Ethan ran to the nearest pet store for supplies, while Jake and Maddie made the dog comfortable with blankets and fresh water. When Ethan returned with food, the dog ate with careful politeness, as if remembering long-ago lessons in manners. "What should we call her?" Maddie asked, watching the dog settle into her makeshift bed. "She's fast," Ethan observed, noting the way the dog moved with liquid grace despite her weakness. "How about Flash?" "Maddie, I am proud of you. You're smart, brave, curious, and kind. Any dad would be lucky to have you," his voice gentled. "But you already have a dad. He's just watching from somewhere else now." "But what if," Maddie's voice got smaller, "what if I wanted two dads? Like, my real dad who's in heaven, and maybe someone here who could teach me stuff and fix cars with me." Victoria felt her heart stop. This was the moment she'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. The moment when the temporary became a request for permanent, when her daughter's need for connection collided with all of Victoria's fears about attachment and loss. Jake looked at Victoria over Maddie's head, his expression careful. "That's something you'd have to talk about with your mom, kiddo. That's a pretty big decision." "Mom?" Maddie turned to Victoria with eyes full of hope and vulnerability. "What do you think?" Victoria looked around the garage, at the cars humming with renewed life, at Ethan and Jake who had somehow become part of their daily routine, at Flash sleeping peacefully in her corner, at her daughter's face bright with possibility. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that families can look lots of different ways. And sometimes the best ones are the ones you choose, not just the ones you're born into." It wasn't exactly an answer, but it wasn't a rejection either. Maddie seemed to sense the opening, the possibility that her impossible wish might not be so impossible after all. "So maybe?" she asked hopefully. "So maybe?" Victoria agreed, meeting Jake's eyes across the garage and seeing her own mixture of hope and terror reflected back at her. They spent the rest of the day working together, sharing lunch amid the mechanical symphony of well-tuned engines, telling stories that wove past and present into something that felt remarkably like future. And when evening came, when tools were cleaned and put away and the cars settled into quiet satisfaction, Victoria found herself reluctant to let the day end. Because for the first time since Marcus's death, home felt like more than just a place to survive. It felt like a place where love could grow again, where family could be rebuilt from the pieces of loss, and the courage to trust in new beginnings. It felt like something worth fighting for. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, while Victoria was reviewing quarterly reports and trying not to think about how quiet the house felt without the sound of tools and laughter drifting from the garage. Jake had finished his evaluation 3 days earlier, his comprehensive report sitting on her desk like a reminder that temporary was exactly that. Temporary. "Mrs. Hale?" Jake's voice was careful, professional. "I wanted to let you know that I've been offered a contract in Detroit. Major restoration project for a private collector. It's a significant opportunity." Victoria's pen stopped moving across the page. "Congratulations, that sounds important." "It is. 6 months minimum, possibly longer. Full relocation." A pause. "Good money, really good money. The kind of money that could secure Ethan's college fund, set up Jake's business for the future, provide the stability that every single father worried about." Victoria understood the practical considerations even as her heart sank. "When would you need to leave?" "End of the week." "So soon." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the familiar walls sliding back into place. "I see." "Victoria," Jake's voice softened, dropping the professional distance. "I haven't said yes yet." Before she could respond, Maddie's voice echoed from the hallway, coming closer. "Is that Jake? Is he coming over today? I want to show him the drawing I made of Flash." Victoria looked up to find her daughter in the doorway, backpack still on her shoulders from school, face bright with anticipation. The enthusiasm died when she saw her mother's expression. "What's wrong?" Victoria's throat felt tight. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the person she'd started thinking of as family was leaving? That love didn't always mean staying. "Jake has been offered a job," Victoria said carefully. "An important one, in Detroit." Maddie's face went very still. "He's leaving?" "He hasn't decided yet." But they both knew what the right decision was. Jake had his own life, his own responsibilities. Ethan needed stability, opportunities, a future built on more than the temporary connection to a grieving family. "Can I talk to him?" Maddie asked in a small voice. Victoria handed over the phone, watching her daughter's face as she spoke. "Jake? It's me. Yeah, I heard. Detroit's really far, isn't it? I know you have to think about Ethan. No, I understand." Maddie's voice got smaller with each exchange. "Will you come say goodbye before you go?" "Okay. I love you too." She handed the phone back with careful composure, the way she'd learned to handle disappointment over the past 2 years, but Victoria caught the tremor in her small hands. "He's coming over tonight," Maddie said quietly, "to talk to us." That evening, they gathered in the garage one last time, the 4 humans in Flash, surrounded by the cars that had brought them together. Jake looked tired, conflicted, older somehow than he had just days before. "I don't want you to go," Maddie said without preamble, her 7-year-old honesty cutting through any attempt at gentle explanation. "I know that's selfish, but I don't want you to." "It's not selfish," Jake said gently. "It's honest, and I don't want to go either." "Then don't." Jake looked at Victoria, then at Ethan, who was leaning against the Porsche, with his usual quiet understanding. "It's complicated, kiddo. This job, it could change everything for me and Ethan, set us up for the future. But what if the future is here?" Maddie's voice was fierce now, all her mother's stubbornness channeled into one desperate question. What if staying is better than going? Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Her daughter was fighting for what she wanted, refusing to let fear make the choice. Maybe it was time for Victoria to do the same. "Jake," she said quietly, "what do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking around the garage at the cars they'd brought back to life, at Maddie's hopeful face, at the life they'd accidentally built together. "I want to stay," he said finally. "I want to keep fixing things here. I want to teach Maddie about engines and watch her grow up, and I want to see if what we have is real. Then stay." The words came out stronger than Victoria had intended, carrying 2 years of fear and the sudden, fierce certainty that love was worth the risk. "Victoria, stay, both of you. Make this home. Make us family." She looked at Maddie, at Ethan, at Jake's surprised face. "Real family. The kind that chooses to stay." Jake's smile was slow, transformative. "Yeah? Yeah." And in the garage where it all began, surrounded by the cars that had taught them about patience and precision and the quiet magic of making broken things whole again, they chose each other. Not perfect, not without risk, but real. The garage door rolled open to let in the evening light, and their laughter spilled out into the world, the sound of a family that had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the right person doesn't need a resume to matter. They just need the patience to stay. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.